Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Pulse of the Hawks, a spinoff show from the HawksZone Rundown podcast. We were supposed to have the show on Monday. Unfortunately, bad weather where I live caused a power outage, so that's why the show abruptly stopped. But we've got good weather, good connection. We got Mookie Alexander back from Field Gulls to go into this whole topic of where do we go from here? What is this? What do the expectations look like going forward? We'll recap some of the Rams game. We'll talk about the Seahawks not making any moves at the trade deadline, why that's a positive, and overall just an outlook of where this team's future kind of goes going forward. And we'll play a what if game. What if Seattle had addressed their offensive line years ago, and questions such as that. So without further, let's get into it. Where did my hold on for a second here, everybody? There we go.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
For this run. What a run. Get off me.
DK.
Yes, sir.
Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
And Washington's got away. Leo Wilson to catch. Geno Smith and Jimbo. The Seahawks are going to hold the NFC Championship.
Every year, the NFL does.
Is it going to be another 9-8?
We've got to finish something.
They have to fix the offensive
Part of his
line.
success and part of
ambition of being the LOB
Want to hear that's trading DK Metcalf.
Play him aggressive.
This is the HawksZone Rundown with Ryan and Bryce.
All right, everyone. I've got Mookie Alexander from Field Gulls back with me for our second episode of Pulse of the Hawks. Mookie, again, apologies about Monday, but how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Take two, I guess. But it's a beautiful day out here in the Portland area. And, hopefully no power outages, no nothing, no technical difficulties. And we can get to what we really want to talk about regarding the Seahawks. And it also gave us a little more time to just digest what happened. I'm not talking about the election, of course. I'm talking about what happened on Sunday with the Seahawks and Rams.
Yeah, no, we'll get into that right now off the top. We'll get into our Seahawks Rams recap of this past weekend's game. And Mookie, honestly, I've had a chance to go back and dive into a little bit more of, where the struggles on this team were, how did that game actually go? Given the circumstances, I know there was a lot of talk, and I made, a lot of things about Geno and how he played in that game. To be under a 60% pressure rate is ridiculous. And I think we said it on the first version of this. It's basically like Seattle's trotting out right now a junior college offensive line to play against NFL players. It's really bad, and it's not looking like it's getting better anytime soon. My thing is the two interceptions in the red zone for me. Watching Geno, you can see, he's trying to throw the ball out of bounds on one of them through the back of the end zone. I would have liked to have seen that go out to the side maybe. But I want to see Geno, and this is the problem. I think he's pressing. I think he's trying to make everything happen because nothing's happening. And that's what's making this kind of come out the way it is. And people want to look at the stats and they want to say, well, look at his statistics and so on. And statistics can lie to you a bit too in a regard. And, we talk about always leading, in passing yards and so on. Well, he also throws the ball more than anybody else in the NFL. He's currently completing the ball more than anybody else because we're passing 70% of the time. No offense is 70-30 like we are. So yes, his numbers are going to be inflated. But for me, and this is going to be the big thing I always keep coming back to with Geno, and I don't know if you're different on it, Mookie, but I don't see elite decision-making from Geno Smith consistently. He has moments of it, but he doesn't consistently have it. And when I think of great quarterbacks or top quarterbacks in the league, that's usually what the separator is. It isn't so much talent as what their decision making is.
Yeah, looking back at Geno's game, it was better than I thought at the time because briefly that fourth quarter looked like that was going to be his single worst quarter as a Seahawks. In fact, I wrote quite controversially that it felt like the Geno Smith era unofficially ended, not in the sense that he would get benched after the bye week, but in the sense that that might be one of those games where the front office looks at that and goes, we're not re-signing you, or we're going to move on from you next year and go a different direction at quarterback. But even still, even with his positive moments, I feel like there are instances where he is pressing too much, and almost to a fault. with his reads and his progressions. Like the second interception, the pick six, that felt very much like a play where, one, he should be rolling out. Like as soon as he felt the pressure, he should be not taking 3 steps back. He should be rolling to his left and throwing it out of bounds. And there are times where it feels like he is trying to hang in the pocket a little bit too long. And that has gotten him into trouble at times. He's been really good at avoiding sacks over the last couple of years, but it does feel like he is trying to do too much out there. Throwing the ball out of the back of the end zone, he could have just thrown it at the feet of Kenneth Walker instead. Or he could have thrown it to Walker sooner. It's like once that read isn't open, almost to the point where it looks like he's not a one-read quarterback. I don't want to make that statement, but sometimes he's waiting and waiting and waiting for that read to get open and then go into the next one. And there really wasn't anything on his first read on that play. So he should have moved off of that a beat or two sooner, and he might have had a chance to throw it away or throw it to Walker, do anything else but throw that interception. I know he got hit, but it's still a case where I put the onus on him for that pick. The third interception is interesting because of the holding penalty that should have been called on Fisk when he grabbed Barner. But what worried me was less of that interception and more the fact that the Rams snuffed out the play anyway. I mean, that was a chance for a tackle for loss or a no gain, because Barner would have caught that if he was in stride, and we got immediately tackled by Kinchins, and then we're looking at 3rd and goal. But it's a timing play. It's a risky play. And just even the slightest timing misfire, and you're risking something really bad happening. So, yes, with Geno, the last drive in regulation, that was fantastic. I mean, he got us out of a 2nd and 24 jam, and that 4th down throw to Smith and Jigba, that was like prime Wilson to prime Doug Baldwin. That little fade route down to the sideline, that was a thing of beauty. And the throw to tie the game, also beautiful. The way he manipulated the cornerback to focus on Bobo so that he could hit JSN in the corner, excellent. But he is prone to being streaky. He is a good quarterback. I think that Geno is a good starting level quarterback. But to win with Geno and to be a Super Bowl contender with Geno, you would have to be at a level where you're like the Detroit Lions, where Jared Goff has been the butt of jokes for a good while, even though he's been to a Super Bowl and is pretty close to going to one last season. He might not be an exceptional talent, but he's got the pieces around him to be really good. If that Lions offensive line was bad, we know how Goff can generally act under pressure, and he has his goof moments. I think Goff is probably better than Geno just on body of work, but that Geno tier, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, that level, you can win with that quarterback if the circumstances around you are also really ideal. Even for elite quarterbacks, you want the ideal circumstances, but look at Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is an excellent quarterback. He routinely has a terrible offensive line, a lack of a running game, and this year he doesn't even have a good defense, but he's having one of the best seasons of his career. And then you look at Mahomes, his offensive line is good. His running game is all right, but it's not explosive. The wide receiver issue for him is going on 2 seasons now. That's why they had to trade for DeAndre Hopkins, and yet he's still able to do some incredible things, the touchdown interception ratio aside. So, yeah, this game to me was ultimately on the offense, which means that Geno played a role in it. But the 60% pressure rate, as you said, he's not that type of quarterback where he can be Kyler Murray, where he can be Mahomes, or where he can be Lamar Jackson, where he can escape and make some magic on a per-play basis. He's just not that kind of guy. He's not immobile. He is quite mobile, more mobile than we realize. In fact, he leads the team in explosive rushes, which is damning of this offensive line. But with Geno at quarterback, that was all the more reason to invest in this offensive line a lot better than we've seen over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, and we'll get to the offensive line here in a bit. But, the thing for me with the 2 Geno interceptions, the first one he threw, that's on JSN. Like, catch that ball. Like, don't let it hit your shoulder pads. Don't leave it close. Make that catch. There was one he almost had later on in the game where he threw it into triple coverage and it was dropped. Mm-hmm. But that's for me, like, Geno has elite physical traits. He's got the stature you want. He's got the arm. He can make some plays. He moves the pocket really well. But, and like you said, that throw to JSN, that's an elite level throw. That's a top 10 NFL throw that he feathered right into that corner of the end zone for JSN. But, and this is the thing, is when people look at those 2 interceptions in the red zone, one, you can't turn the ball over in the red zone. Like, you just can't. When you're struggling as much as Seattle is at points to stay in games, score points, be consistent, you can't turn the ball over. 2, especially the first one, like you said, throw it at the feet. You have Jared Verse within a step of you. He's not, slowly coming. Like, he's coming to crush you. Just realize the play's over. Like, if you're already in that backpedal state, the play's over. You're not going to make anything spectacular happen. There's guys in the end zone. Just live for the next down. And that's where, for me with Geno, when you talk about like a Super Bowl and, to have Geno as your quarterback, you literally have to have nailed every other position properly to have that happen. Like, I don't even think, and you could say, oh, you could have an elite defense and then Geno can get you. But this is the problem, is Geno's decision-making in crucial points. Like, we're not even playing playoff football right now, and he's making these errors in big games in the regular season. You can't have that in the playoffs when literally one of those interceptions could end your season because it's a pick six and it changes the momentum in a game. The other thing for me, and we'll get into it now, I guess, with this recap, is what was your thoughts of the defense? How did you think the defense, was able to kind of rise back up to the occasion a little bit? They definitely didn't make life easy for McVay or Stafford in that regard on Sunday.
Yes, this is one of those times where you go, the defense kind of capitulated in overtime after the failed 4th and 1, and it's mostly Riq Woolen. I mean, he started and ended the drive. One, he should have been able to get an interception. As a former receiver, you have to be able to just attack the ball. Forget former receiver, even just as a regular cornerback, you've got to have that awareness to attack the ball, get both hands on it, and they're back in the field goal range, and they don't even have to run another play if they don't want to. And then him getting beat, caught peeking into the backfield, it's cover 0. So there's no safety help. I know that they're expecting the run, but they're at the 39-yard line. They're not playing for a 50-yard field goal. So he had great recovery speed to get close to Robinson, and Robinson had to make a spectacular catch, but it's just the little things that Woolen can be prone to. But the defense in general, the run defense was vastly improved from the Bills game and most of the rest of the season. It seems like the alignments were cleaner. The edge setting was a lot better, especially from even the defensive backs like Josh Jobe. I thought Byron Murphy, even though he wasn't impressive as a pass rusher, he did defend the run quite well, and so did Leonard Williams. You saw the vision of what Mike Macdonald wants to see out of his run defense compared to the previous weeks, where it looks like, it almost looks like there's a just complete disconnect at all 3 levels. So that was encouraging. Kyron Williams didn't end up scoring a touchdown for the first time in 10 games. They'll hang the banner there. Ernest Jones was really impressive, and he might be the real deal. I mean, he showed up on a couple of days' notice last week, and he got picked on in coverage, but he looks like a sound tackler, and he seems like somebody who won't blow his assignments regularly, and he will generally make the right play. So that should improve the linebacking group immensely. Pass rush, I thought, was also good, even with the lack of sacks. They hassled Stafford. They pressured him 15 times, and he was just 3 for 15 on those plays. He was putting him in the dirt. He should have been picked a couple of times more than he actually was. So that was extremely encouraging to see. The only negatives I saw, again, getting beat on some of those crossers and some of the play action stuff. They've really had a hard time defending play action all season. But compared to how we've seen Pete Carroll's defenses against McVay over the years, like, that was a really encouraging showing, even in a loss. Like, we mentioned this on the aborted show on Monday, that this was reminiscent of last year, where the defense got off to a great start, 13-0 Seahawks lead, and the Rams weren't able to do much anything. And then, the Rams came back and they got a win, a penalty-aided win for sure. And the same dynamic happened in this one too, penalty-aided. Some BS calls like the Woolen illegal contact that extended a drive, the Derek Hall roughing the passer that was just complete bunk. Woolen not getting an OPI in his favor when he should have been a pick in the end zone. So, those things just didn't break Seattle's way. But yes, as much as we've gotten on the defense against competent teams, this is generally what I had hoped to see out of McDonald's group. And we don't know if this is a one-off and San Francisco is just going to completely undress Seattle in the rematch. But if after the bye week, and they should get healthier, they don't really have any pressing injuries on defense right now, other than Kayvon Wallace and guys who are already out like Nwosu. With that rematch, albeit potentially with Christian McCaffrey, we'll see if the defense can hold up its end of the bargain again. And if they can, then the onus is really on the offense to stop getting in its own way, because I think that the last few weeks, the offense's repeated issues getting in its own way through penalties, bad snaps, bad blocking, bad throws, whatever, that's hindered the team a lot more than the defensive performance.
No, and it truly has. Like, the one thing that encouraged me a lot in this game was the run fits were so much better. Like, we weren't seeing ourselves getting gashed for 20 and 15-yard runs. There was that point coming out of the halftime break where the Rams did kind of establish a bit of a run game. But like I said, I think on the aborted show as well, they were, they had 24 carries, 68 yards. They were averaging 2 yards a carry. Like, that's a very successful defensive outing. One, in the run game, two, against the Sean McVay team, where Sean McVay likes to lean on the run because he builds so much of his passing game off of play action. And that was one thing I noticed too, was they weren't able to hit certain concepts that McVay has killed us with year in and year out because they couldn't establish the run the way they wanted to. So, Mookie, like, overall, it wasn't the greatest showing by our offense. And so that leads us into one of our topics for tonight's show. On top of this is the O-line issues. Will it ever be fixed? So I will pose that question to you first. Do you have faith in John Schneider and this scouting department and pro development and acquisitions department? Do you think they're ever going to get this right, whether it's through free agency, through the draft? Are they actually ever going to be able to build a average to above average NFL offensive line in Seattle?
Based on what is looking like 15 years of data, the Seahawks under John Schneider seem capable of getting one or two quality starters, but as a whole unit, it's just not happening. So I can't remember what I said for much of Monday, but I'll repeat it and see how it goes. But I just think about the start of the Carroll Schneider era. Russell Okung, first pick of the draft. For Seattle, not number 1 overall pick, but I think he went number 6 or something. They drafted James Carpenter in the first round the following year. Was he overdrafted? Probably. But that aside, they addressed the O-line early. And they extended Max Unger's contract while he was still on his rookie deal. He was a Tim Ruskell draft pick, but I think it was in 2012 that he got his contract extension, made him one of the highest paid centers in the league. So you had Okung, Carpenter, and Unger just on the left side through center, and then on the right side you had Sweezy, so some day 3 gem that you found, and then Breno Giacomini, that gritty veteran, I guess you could say, because sometimes he would commit bonehead penalties and go over the line, but he wasn't a total liability in terms of being a poor pass protector, poor run blocker. So in 2013 they had the most expensive offensive line in the league, and some of that, of course, was the fact that Russell Okung wasn't on the current rookie wage scale that we know today. I think his deal was like $50-some-odd million. But that 2013 season, there were so many injuries that we ended up with Paul McQuiston, Michael Bowie, Lemuel Jean-Pierre, a lot of backups and not good ones playing well over a quarter of the season, not half the season, such that by the time we got to see the O-line in full, it was the Super Bowl, and Seattle allowed no sacks on Russell Wilson, one of the few times that had ever happened. But it almost feels like Schneider took the mobility of Wilson for granted, and just this cheap approach is too much. Now, doesn't mean they haven't been investing in draft capital. In terms of draft capital, I think about Jermaine Ifedi, first-round pick, Reese Odiambo, third-round pick, Ethan Posick, second-round pick, Justin Britt, second-round pick. It's just that we've seen Posick at guard when he should have been a center from year 1, and instead Britt, of course, was the starting center. We've seen Justin Britt, the only offensive lineman Schneider's ever drafted, get a contract extension with the team, start out as a tackle. He was awful there. Start out and then go to left guard, terrible there. Then he goes to center. And he was an all right center, but nothing setting the world on fire. But they've also had a lot of misses. Like Mark Lewinsky, I know he ended up panning out better in Indianapolis, but he was brutal here. And so was Reese Odiambo. Odiambo being so bad necessitated the Dwayne Brown trade. But free agency, I think, is my biggest bugaboo with him. And the way this offensive line has been handled, because it's not even mid-level signings are happening. So I brought up Tyler Biadasz as an example. Like, yeah, Connor Williams on a cheap deal, I can forgive him for that because we didn't think Williams would be this bad. There was a risk to it, but pre-knee injury, he was looking like a top center. But Biadasz, 3-year, $30 million deal, I would do that in a heartbeat over the contract Draymond Jones got. And Seattle just flatly refuses to do that under Schneider. Instead we get these 1-year patchwork deals where it's Ode Abushi, it's Luke Jokel, it's Jamarcus Webb, it's Bradley Sowell, and they end up on the starting lineup. And they got Wilson hurt in 2016 pretty much directly. Like in game one, he got hurt because Ndamukong Suh just went right through the Seahawks offensive line. Then he got hurt again 2 weeks later. And they're going to get Geno hurt. We already saw him get hurt last year from Aaron Donald. And yes, it's Aaron Donald, but this cheap approach in terms of free agency, in terms of like wanting to swing a big trade, I think enough is enough on that front. And I believe that if Schneider does lose his job over this, it's going to be because of the offensive line and the lack of continuity, the lack of consistently quality players. They've tried, like Cross and Lucas. We thought we had our cornerstone tackles, but this interior of the offensive line has been a total dumpster fire. And I can't help but think of that line. I think guards are overdrafted and overpaid. Well, no kidding. You gave Jokel $7 million, and he's not even a natural guard. But still, Tomlinson, another cheap deal. He's been playing better as of late, and he's still not very good. The guard position with Bradford starting and continuing to look like the worst offensive lineman on the team. It's just a continued problem that is something that doesn't seem like it's going to be fixed with Schneider. I don't know if it's a scouting issue or what, but the results are not encouraging. They have been a bottom half pass blocking unit almost every year of the Schneider era. And it is astonishing to see that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said, Mookie, about the offensive line. And there's a couple things. I was on Dan Vienza's Seahawks Forever show, and I kind of made a reference back to when Kansas City lost their Super Bowl to Tampa Bay. And Mahomes got abused in that game. He got beat up. What did they do the next year? They went out and got Joe Thuney, Orlando Brown. They built an offensive line to protect their number one asset. And when I look at Seattle and I look at, what Seattle did very well with Mike Holmgren's era when he was here was they built a good offensive line with Walter Jones and Steve Hutchinson, Robbie Toback, Chris Gray, Sean Locklear. Like, they had a good, solid offensive line. And some of those guys were not massive, big-time signings or draft picks. Some were, and Walter Jones and Steve Hutchinson, but like Robbie Toback came from Atlanta. Chris Gray was a, free agent pickup, I believe. They drafted Sean Locklear, but the thing for me, and this is the biggest issue I have, and I have kind of the same concerns with John Schneider, is they are in deals in the free agency. There was TJ Lang they were a part of, and we were in on Joe Thuney. Were you really though, or was it like, we picked up the phone and we called the agent so we could say we were involved? Like, were you actually really pressing for it? And that's for me where Mike Holmgren. I was listening to one of his radio shows that he does. And he made a really interesting comment to when he was general manager of the Seattle Seahawks before they had Tim Ruskell come in and take it over. And he said, I screwed up in how I evaluated offense and defensive football players at the NFL level. I always spent money in free agency on defense and drafted on offense. He goes, in hindsight, you can't do it that way. Get the young, hungry players on defense from the draft, sprinkle in a few veterans, but go spend most of your money on your offensive line and veteran signings. Like, if they're to rebuild this offensive line, they need to tear it down to the studs. Now, that being said, is you basically have one lineman, I would say, that you would consider. I'm not counting Abe Lucas in this because I don't know if he'll ever be back to what he was. Charles Cross is the only lineman on this team that's really worth paying, but I, at this point, would say play on your fifth-year option. Like, that's what I would do if I'm Seattle. I'm not walking out a massive extension to him. He can play on his fifth-year option. And then we'll reevaluate where you are next year. But like, you've drafted LeMaya, you've drafted Mike Jarrell, you've drafted Christian Haynes, who now is a healthy scratch because apparently he took a step back out of nowhere, and apparently is so bad that he had to be scratched. And Bradford goes out and gives up 6 sacks and takes 9 penalties out of the 12. But the thing for me is like, you've drafted some guys. Now go get some veterans, like, not Lincoln Tomlinson veterans, like good veteran offensive linemen, so these guys can learn and build yourself an offensive line. If it's what you do in free agency, and then we're all sitting here going, well, you know what? Seattle went out and signed like 4 great starting linemen or good starting linemen that are above NFL average, and that's what they spent their salary, their free agency cap money on. I think there wouldn't be a person in Seattle that's going to go, well, that was a waste of money.
Yeah. Again, no investment and bad investments can be the same thing, I guess, but they're not identical. And I think there have been a lot of bad investments even both through the draft and free agency. But no investment or minimal investment in free agency, that is something I have an issue with. And we brought up the trades. So I said it on Monday. Schneider's been quite reactive when it comes to swinging for trades for offensive lineman establishments. So the Gabe Jackson trade happened months after Russell Wilson's "I'm tired of getting hit so much." So they trade for Jackson. He's just hitting the other side at 30. They extend him right away. They give up a 4th-round pick in the process. And he is pretty much cooked by the time his second year hits and Wilson's gone and all that. The Dwayne Brown trade, that probably doesn't happen if George Fant doesn't tear his ACL in preseason, because he was going to be the starting left tackle. And why was George Fant going to be the starting left tackle? Because he impressed in 2016 when he filled in for the injured Bradley Sowell. I think it was the 6-6 game, actually, where Sowell was just so rotten, and he gave up a strip sack of Wilson, and he got hurt on the same play, and they had to put Fant in, and then Fant's in for the rest of the season. So Fant gets hurt, Odhiambo comes in, and he is a complete disaster there. So they have to trade for Dwayne Brown midseason. Now, the Dwayne Brown trade worked out. He ended up being a good, proven offensive lineman, and part of the last really good, consistently run-blocking Seahawks offensive lines. But again, reactive trades, not proactive. So for Seattle, you bring up the Holmgren years. So yes, Walter was drafted before Holmgren got there, but he drafted Hutchinson. And then you bring up everybody else. Chris Spencer, famously thrown under the bus by Jim Mora, but still, he tried to build the offensive line, and he built it really, really well, such that Sean Alexander could be an MVP, one of the last running backs we'll ever see get an MVP award. And Matt Hasselbeck had a very efficient season. And yes, the Seahawks had a very soft schedule that year, but they made the Super Bowl with an incredibly efficient offense. It wasn't bombs away, Hasselbeck throwing for 40 touchdowns or anything like that. But that's the sort of offense that I would envision if Geno was the quarterback. Hasselbeck was a good quarterback, a Pro Bowl level quarterback when Pro Bowl level meant something, but he was rarely somebody he was definitely not somebody you would call an elite quarterback. Any longtime Seahawks fans would remember the days when he would get benched for Trent Dilfer, or he would just go out and just struggle. But the 2005 season, the 2007 season, those were really good seasons where Hasselbeck had time. He could throw in rhythm. He could find Darryl Jackson. He could find Bobby Ingram, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not getting that equivalent. And an argument I saw in the comments section of a Field Gulls article I wrote regarding Schneider and the offensive line is, well, Wilson was on his rookie deal, and of course he had to pay him. I really can't stand that argument, because the Eagles are paying Jalen Hurts right now. They're paying A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. They paid Jason Kelce before he retired. They're paying Lane Johnson right now. So it is possible to pay all those dudes. Look at the Detroit Lions. They just paid Goff. They paid Amon-Ra. They paid David Montgomery. And they already paid Penei Sewell. They've got Ragnow and a bunch of others. The money can be there. Seattle just allocates their resources so poorly, or at least in a questionable manner. Like, they'll rubber stamp giving up 2 first-round picks and then a market-setting contract extension for Jamal Adams. Or they'll give Draymond Jones that contract. Or they'll make the Leonard Williams trade, which, while I like Leonard Williams, and it was a good trade in terms of what he brings to the defense, we don't see that same level of urgency on the offensive line on a consistent basis. So it has to be, to me, if Schneider gets another season, and I expect him to, unless Seattle completely bottoms out, he has to get real with this offensive line, because, as you said, it's going to be a remake. And Cross is going to be here, but Tomlinson better not be here. Williams is playing himself not just out of a job next year. He might be playing himself out of a job this season. He's been that poor the last 2 weeks. And then forget about Bradford if he continues to struggle like this. Maybe Haynes replaces him the next year, but either way, you're still looking at potentially another starter to replace. And then we don't know Abe Lucas's health, as you said. George Fant's probably going to be a cap casualty, because as soon as he went back on the field, he got hurt again. So you're looking at 3 starters or 4 starters on the offensive line next year, and the same continuity problem continues. And you might be looking at, a 7th different starting center in 7 seasons ever since Max Unger was traded. I mean, and since Britt left, you got to be kidding me with that. So, yeah, it has to change.
Well, and the thing for me too, like, when I think this is kind of how, and we'll get into the kind of what do they do beyond this point, kind of going beyond this season. But for me, you're right. If this bottoms out completely, then I think John Schneider absolutely is going to be on the chopping block, or potentially could be on the chopping block. But he has this coming up off season, which I expect him to be here as well, to get this right, to fix it. And, it's funny to me because at this point, Connor Williams, I don't see a difference between Connor Williams out there and putting Jalen Sundell out there. Because Jalen Sundell, even though he's a UDFA, he's looked better in the preseason when he played. And I'd like to see him actually get a shot because he can't be any worse. If he can at least snap it straight to Geno and hit him in the 7, we're in a better situation than having Geno look everywhere else for it. And like the worrisome thing about it is for the longest time you saw on Twitter and all the Seahawks reporters, oh, look, Geno Smith and Connor Williams are working on their snaps before practice. It clearly hasn't helped for whatever reason, and he can't seem to get it right. And Connor Williams has no push whatsoever. And this is the thing, in regards to the last little bit, I'll talk on the offensive line before we move to our next topic, is I feel like it's a complete, utter philosophy identity crisis on that O-line alone. Not even the offense, just the O-line alone, because you have guys that are better suited for gap power schemes and duo schemes, and you got guys that are better suited for the zone and wide zone schemes. And you're trying to mish them all together. It doesn't work. Like, you need your 5 guys to work a certain way. That's the best way you're going to get it. If you're going to be a, like what John Schneider has preached for years and has never delivered on, we want to be a tough, physical team like we were back. Well, then go get tough, physical offensive linemen. Become a power gap team and like completely go into that. Don't go, okay, we're going to get a guard that suits that, like a DJ Fluker, but then we're going to get, Austin Blythe as a center. Austin Blythe is not a power gap center. Like, it's just, it's asinine to me that John Schneider will say one thing over here and then completely go over here and do the opposite of what he's been talking about. And he's basically built a finesse football team. And that's the biggest problem is you play in a division with 2 defenses in the Rams and the 49ers that are not finesse defenses. They're going to come punch you in the mouth, and that's all they keep doing. You're like that, clown that you punch and it comes back up and back and forth. That's basically what our offensive line is for most teams' defenses now. It's like, oh, look, Seattle built the same thing again. Let's just go beat it up. It's not going to fight back anyways. So I hope we're right and that John Schneider actually addresses this, but I don't have a lot of faith that he actually will.
Yeah,
let's go.
I just want to mention something. Yeah, Dan Viennes was at the same training camp practice that I was. I went up to Seattle for the Lumen Field practice, and Sundell was one of his highlights. And yeah, I really would like to see Sundell get more snaps. Now, he played 1 snap on offense in the Rams game, and it was the Kenneth Walker 1-yard run right before the last Geno interception. And if you watch the All-22, you can watch Sundell out at right tackle pancake Braden Fisk. Meanwhile, Connor Williams gave up a sack to Braden Fisk with almost no resistance. And this snaps thing, where he's like a bad pitcher who's throwing way out of the strike zone, this is not a new problem for him. He had this issue in Miami too. It's just that he could also pass block to make up for the wayward snaps. But if you're giving us neither the blocking nor the accurate snapping, then you become a net negative. So if Mike McDonald says everything is on the table in terms of personnel changes and whatnot, then they have to seriously look at either benching Williams or moving him to guard and sitting Bradford. But something has to change on that offensive line for some level of cohesiveness, because as you said, they're not getting push. They're getting pushed back. You talk about a step back for Christian Haynes. I'm seeing several steps back for those offensive linemen out there. So what does that mean for Christian Haynes? Is he getting driven out of VMAC?
Well, and that's my thing. When Mike McDonald made that comment in the press conference, it was like, okay, so what's your accountability now for Anthony Bradford, who gave up 6 sacks and 9 penalties in the game? Out of the 12 we got were on him. What's the accountability? He's now benched next week. And like, my opinion, everybody on that offensive line, except for Charles Cross, you are auditioning every week. We are going to find the 5 best and throw it out there and hope that it starts to work in the right direction. So let's go to our next part of this show and let's play the what if game. So, listeners, viewers, throw any what if scenarios you'd like to have us answer in here as well. Me and Mookie are going to do a couple of them. I'll pose the questions to Mookie and he'll kind of give us his what if scenario. So, Mookie, here's a what if. What if we had actually built a successful offensive line in the last 5 years? How different does this team look? Does Pete Carroll still have his job?
You know, what's interesting? By saying the last 5 years, that includes the last 2 Russell Wilson seasons. It becomes possible that Wilson's still a Seahawk. Now, for as great as Wilson has been throughout his Seahawks tenure, I'm fairly convinced that no matter how good the offensive line is, this version of Wilson is going to take sacks. He's going to create needless pressure on himself. But he would have also had time. If you give him time and he will make his reads, as we see in Pittsburgh, the deep ball still works. He's not as mobile as he used to be. And I'm wondering if that's going to play itself out towards the end of the season with the Steelers. But the point being, it's possible Wilson is still a Seahawk if the offensive line was significantly better than it actually was. And it's twofold. One, it protects him. And two, it improves the run game, which at this point of Wilson's career, he clearly needs. And he's getting it in Pittsburgh right now. And it's also something that I think Geno needs at the moment, where the pressure is off of him. He doesn't have to lead the league in pass attempts because he's having a more efficient Sam Howell season, where Sam Howell in Washington threw the most passes in the league. He had, 4,000 passing yards, and yet his advanced metrics were absolutely terrible, and he threw 21 touchdowns and 21 interceptions. So we don't want to see that for Geno. So if they had built a better offensive line, yeah, it's possible Carroll would have been gone anyway because of the defense, but it would have given us a lot more hope for the offense, and the offense maybe would have been able to get a game or two that they failed to get. So if they had taken Creed Humphrey over D. Eskridge, for example, we wouldn't be searching for yet another center.
Yeah, no, exactly. So Mookie, we'll just go into a question here and we'll get to our next what if, but we've got one here from, where is it? Here it is. Here we go. Ian Victor. Mookie, I said, well, Bryce had technical issues. Again, sorry everyone for that. And I didn't get Bryce to get a chance here. The Seahawks have to take the Chiefs approach and tear down the entire offensive line. So like you said, if 5 years ago, what if they had done this and torn it down and rebuilt it and got some talent in here, we might actually be talking about Russell Wilson potentially still being here as our quarterback, and maybe Geno doesn't have his renaissance. So another what if that I will propose to you here, Mookie. What if Seattle hadn't taken Devin Witherspoon and Anthony Richardson had still been there? Would Seattle have taken Anthony Richardson? And would we be having this conversation about quarterback in Geno's regard, or would Anthony Richardson be under center this season for us?
Yeah, that would be interesting because we're seeing the Richardson drama play out in Indianapolis. They're in a bind. Joe Flacco cannot run. He can barely throw these days. He can still produce the classic Flacco 300-yard passing game, but he's almost 40 years old. And the fact that he cannot run hurts their running game because Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson have got that read option threat where if Richardson keeps it, then he can take off. If Taylor gets it, then there's going to be more space for him to operate. Flacco doesn't give you that. Richardson, very good dual threat, very good rusher. And he's got one heck of an arm. And the throws that he does make are absolutely mesmerizing, the successful ones. He cannot lead an offense consistently. I mean, it's really hard to sustain an offense, a passing offense, that is, when you're struggling to complete half your passes every week. In today's NFL, when it's never been easier to have a high completion percentage. So if he was in Seattle, it would be fascinating to see whether they would have moved on from Geno right there and then, or if they would have let Richardson sit. And there would have been a debate because Richardson hardly played in college, didn't have a lot of starts in high school either. So the whole argument, he needs reps. There would have been an inclination to play Richardson over Smith, but he might be served from learning from a better quarterback in Geno Smith because he is a better quarterback. Geno's a better quarterback than Flacco and a better quarterback than Gardner Minshew. You might have gotten different coaching here, and maybe one benefit to Richardson, if he was a Seahawk, he would help the run game to some degree because the struggles of the Seahawks run game, and I don't want to blame Geno for this, they have no diversity. All of their rushing attempts have been either Geno on sneaks or scrambles or the running backs carrying the ball. They haven't given the ball to wide receiver but one time. What was it? A Chenault end around, and it did close to nothing. Arizona's given the ball to Trey McBride on jet sweeps. 49ers do with George Kittle. With Richardson, the playbook opens up a bit. Maybe the best case scenario I would say is if Richardson was drafted and Geno was still on the team, there could be that two quarterback dynamic where Richardson would be in for some plays, so similar to Justin Fields and Andy Dalton in Chicago, where, yeah, he can get a couple of throws here and there, as opposed to starting a full game, something that he's clearly not ready for at the moment, because that Colts team is not lacking talent. He is struggling, but you don't want to give up on him. And now that you bring up this what if, I don't totally rule out Seattle looking to get Richardson if he's available, and the Colts say, we gave it a shot. We need him to go somewhere else, and we're going to reboot again.
That's actually a really good point there at the end. I've got one in here from Ian. What if Cody White gets more snaps and plays well and takes Bobo's spot? Would Bobo be on the team next season?
Well, Cody White was a revelation, and I'm overstating it, but I think that Bobo has his limitations that we're all aware of. He is not a speedster. I don't care that it was pouring rain when he was doing his 40-yard dash. We watch him on the field. He's not quick. So he's a very good blocker. He's one of the few good blocking receivers on this team. So he's good for 1 or 2 catches a game. He is a wide receiver 4. With Cody White, though, if he gets more snaps, which means he's going to have to get elevated a couple more times, I think that would just take away Shenault's snaps because he's giving Seattle nothing there. He is a pure gadget guy. And it's funny, the touchdown pass that Geno threw to JSN before halftime, that was like a 3-by-1 concept, and you had Lockett, JSN, and Shenault. That was one of the few times I've even tried to put Shenault deep down the field. He cannot run routes beyond the line of scrimmage, it seems. All of his targets are within 5 yards. So the whole gadget thing I don't think works out for him. Whereas with Cody White, Geno was throwing it to him. He was targeting him aggressively. He drew a PI, which should have never been called. I mean, that was a pure ref show. Let's be real. It wasn't all bad calls against Seattle. That was a wretched PI call. He caught a pass over the middle, was able to get a little bit of yards after catch. That 2nd and 24 throw on the final drive of regulation, that's a great catch. And he's got value on special teams. So maybe it's possible they would just keep White and Bobo, because White did have a good preseason, and then look at other options as far as both Shenault and even Derek Young, because Derek Young hardly plays on offense. And he can contribute on special teams, but at least for Shenault, he's the kick returner. Derek isn't even giving you that. So I actually do want to see Cody White more. I've been a skeptic of all the preseason Warrior wide receivers we keep touting for the Seahawks over the years. But White looked good in preseason, and in his first meaningful game action in Seattle, he looked like somebody who could be a nice wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 option. So yeah, I think that's a very valid question from Ian as far as getting Cody White more snaps. Look, he played 30-something snaps. Shenault played like 6. So the coaching staff seems aware that White brings something that Shenault and Derek Young do not.
So we got another one here from MWMM. So he goes, at what point, so let's say what if Seattle loses 2 more, do the Hawks change their philosophy and give the rookies and young players more of a role?
I think they should, but the NFC West is so tightly packed that they might not do this until they're way out. So let's say in a month, they're 4-9. They've even lost to the Jets. So even MetLife Stadium is not their home away from home anymore. It's not their East Coast vacation home. They're definitely going to be out of the playoff picture, because you would think one of Arizona, San Francisco, or the Rams, at least one of them is going to have 6 or 7 wins by then. We know at this rate that barring a collapse, the 3 wild card spots probably going to be 9-10 win teams. So if Seattle's below 500 entering like the second week of December, yeah, it is possible that we see more guys. Like we might see Lomeo play. We might see Tyrus Knight get more run, because, and I tweeted it before our show, is that the Seahawks this year went really heavy on Senior Bowl players. And it's a running joke with the Seahawks that they like to draft 23, 24-year-old rookies. Well, this year's a little different because now underclassmen can go. So Byron Murphy was an underclassman who got to play in the Senior Bowl. But of the true seniors in the Senior Bowl, you're looking at Knight, Pritchett, Lomea, DJ James, who's not on the team anymore, and then Christian Haynes, and then AJ Barner. Barner's already playing more, and he could be the tight end 1 indefinitely given no offense injury. But it concerns me a tad that for older rookies that Seattle's drafting, that James is already gone. Pritchett was a healthy scratch last week. Lomea has been a healthy scratch all season. Knight's a pseudo-healthy scratch. He doesn't see the field unless somebody gets hurt. And then now Haynes is a healthy scratch. So I think that their philosophy should change if they're way out of the playoff picture. That doesn't mean sit everybody. In other words, don't shut down Geno completely. Don't shut down all the veterans. Don't play lock. Don't put out a preseason lineup on purpose. Otherwise, it's just going to look like horrific football the last 3 weeks, and those are not going to be good players worth retaining. But I do want to see those rookies and the players with promise get some run as opposed to just chilling on the bench in a lost season.
All right. So let's move off of the what if game. It'll be maybe a segment we bring back within this show. Let's get to another elephant in the room. Geno's issues, and is he still an option past this season? So I will defer to you on this one, Mookie, because I've said my pieces on Geno, and everyone's probably heard them on different shows. But we've talked about his issues from the game, at least what we saw, and they're kind of reoccurring issues. They have been. Do you see Geno Smith as an option past this year for this team, or is it time to consider moving in a different direction?
I think whether he's here or not, Seattle has to draft a quarterback in 2025. And what's unfortunate is this is not a great quarterback class. I don't know the ins and outs of many other positions in the college ranks, but I've watched the quarterbacks enough and have had to for the last few years. Shedeur Sanders is probably the only guaranteed first-round pick. Cam Ward can be a little chance. He's fun, but man, he has some bozo moments in him that are touchdowns in college and are almost guaranteed interceptions in the NFL. Carson Beck's stock is tanked to the point where he might go undrafted, and then Quinn Ewers is just a day 2, day 3 caliber pick. So Nathan Rourke, I think that's his name, of Indiana, could be in.
Oh, Curtis Rourke, his brother's Nathan.
Curtis Rourke, yeah. Corbin Smith has been touting him very much, but yeah, they would be best served to at least draft a quarterback because, of course, Howell's deal is up in 2025. So if Howell starts in 2025, he's basically a full contract year dude. And if he isn't any good, now what do you do? So with Geno, I would like him to be a long-term option, but I'm also not so blinded by his incredible story to the point where I'm ignorant to the fact that he's still in his mid-30s. And while he might not have the mileage of most other quarterbacks in the mid-30s, the odds of him producing at an even above average level at age 37, 38 are going to be minimal. If he gets extended, it would have to be like a 3-year deal with an out, something similar to what he's playing on now. But past this year, I think he's been better than the 11 touchdowns and 10 interceptions shows, and that the offensive line has done him no favors. And I would also say that Ryan Grubb is not doing him or the offense a lot of favors lately. But if we are to accept that the Seahawks aren't really close to contention and they're not looking like it right now, is there really much of a point to keeping Geno in the long term if this is not going to be a case where Seattle is just going to be – they're not this close. And maybe that's been kind of the problem for Carroll and Schneider, is always thinking that you're almost there. We just got to get one piece here, one piece there. If they bottom out this year, even if it's not Geno's fault, and he's certainly not the main reason they're struggling, and they're not the main reason they're 4-5. In fact, he's probably a good reason they're not 2-7 right now. I think that it's more likely than not that Geno is not here beyond 2025. In other words, he's either gone this year or he's gone the next year.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel. I feel like if Seattle somehow bottoms out in this season and we get to that Packers game and we've maybe won 1 game or 2 in that time period, I think there's a good chance they may turn to Sam Howell and go, you have the rest of the season. And if they do that, in my opinion, that's your sign that the Geno era is over, because you would not have basically benched your guy that you're going to restart again and potentially go into contract negotiational talks with and bench him during that stretch run there at that point, regardless if you're in the playoffs or not. That's an indicative point to me where it's like they're ready to move on and go in a different direction. My thing with the quarterback class, like you were so alluding to there, Mookie, is that you're right. There isn't anybody that's a real talent in this class that blows you away. Shedeur Sanders is basically the kind of the guy that will go probably in the first round. The one guy I'm very interested, there's 2 guys that I'm very interested in, and they're not high on everyone's list, but they're guys I think you can get in the mid rounds, late 2nd, 4th, that are guys that could be good NFL starters but need to develop. And that actually means you develop them correctly, like Green Bay does so well. I really like Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU. I like his tape a lot and what he does. His dad was a pro quarterback and is, coach quarterbacks and is a coach's son, and he's got a lot of the intangibles you look for, and he's someone I'd be really excited if Seattle was able to scoop in the, late second, early third. The other one's Drew Allar out of Penn State. And a lot of people want to kind of poo-poo on Drew Allar because, oh, well, he's got this, but he makes dumb mistakes and this, that. That's fine. But they're coachable things that are coachable mistakes you can get out of that type of player. But his size, his intangibles that you look for, he started at a top 5 or top Power 5, program in Penn State. He's gone through some adversity. Those are the guys I like to. And Curtis Rourke isn't bad either, but this is his first time truly playing big-time football and in kind of a down year in the Big Ten, realistically. You're not playing against a Jim Harbaugh Michigan or a packed up, really well-talented Ohio State team. So, I'm interested to see, what he does. But again, nobody to me is we have to spend a first-round pick. You can get those guys in your mid-rounds unless – one of them goes on a big run, but I think you're going to see guys like Jalen Milroe or Cam Ward go ahead of those guys because of their physical ability to make plays happen outside the pocket. In regards to Geno, though, I think we know what Geno is. Geno is a maxed out, I think, 11-win quarterback if you have everything right, and he maybe wins you a playoff game. I don't look at Geno as a guy to be your long-term answer. Everyone wants to keep saying he's the long-term answer. He's not. He's 34 this year. Guys play until they're 40, and you always hear that, oh, look at Tom Brady. There are anomalies in a lot of ways on why those guys have played so long. Geno isn't one of those anomalies. And people may not like that take, but it's just the reality of it. And I'm of the same mindset of you. I think you have to start thinking now about what your options are outside of, Geno Smith and Sam Howell even. Like, what does this team look like at the court? It's probably the weakest room in the Seahawk facility for what is the next step at that spot. You're kind of hamstrung because both contracts end at the end of 2025.
Yes, and I don't want to be making it sound like I dislike Geno. I'm not a Geno hater. I went from a skeptic of Geno to loving his story and think that he has become a good quarterback and a great inspirational figure in the NFL. But I look at it as a timeline thing. If Geno was 28 or 29, I might have had a different opinion about this. But at 34, he doesn't have too many more years left, just as a probability thing. Geno's timeline for being a high-level quarterback versus the Seahawks timeline for building toward being a contender, I don't think they're matching. So if Geno were to, say, go to the Minnesota Vikings right now, if I were to pretend he went to Minnesota right now and that Christian Darrisaw didn't tear his ACL last week, I think that Geno would thrive in Minnesota's offense. And he gets to throw to Jefferson and Addison. That's a pretty good offensive line. He had a really good running game. He's got a great defense with Brian Flores in Minnesota. I think he could succeed there. But the Seahawks don't even have that. They don't have a great running game. They don't have a great offensive line. They got good receivers, but they might have an issue there too, because you don't know what Metcalf's future is and you don't know what Lockett's future is, so they might be rebuilding there. I think what I'm getting at is there's a significant chance they're going to have to rebuild a lot of this offense that is more than just the offensive line. And at that point, it's going to be hard to just keep putting Geno through the same problem over and over again, because it's unlikely they're going to have an overnight fix for the offensive line. It's very possible that they're going to have some issues with the coaching staff. You don't know if this coaching staff is a guarantee. Not necessarily McDonald. You don't know if Ryan Grubb is a one-and-done offensive coordinator the way this season is going. So there are too many question marks to me about the offense as a whole for me to definitively say, yes, give Geno 3 or 4 more years and let him be the quarterback through 2026 or 2027. It'd be nice to see it, and it'd be nice to see Geno tear it up in the second half of the season, and this Seahawks team finishes with 11 wins the division, and it gives people hope. But realistically, it's just a timeline thing where Geno is really good, but the Seahawks are not a really good team. And it's probably best for him for both sides to kind of move on in 2025 if this season goes really south. And it sucks to say, and I would salute Geno, but that's kind of the reality of the Seahawks right now. They're not close.
They are not close. And I think that's going to kind of tie into this next sort of, last kind of question and statement on this team is, what is the outlook after the bye and throughout the rest of the season and beyond this season? What is the expectations for this team going forward, Mookie? Like, for me now, they're in transition and they're in building. And I look at it as if they are not a playoff team by 2026, then there needs to be a massive franchise, like entire franchise overhaul at that point. That means I think John Schneider needs to go. I think there needs to be an evaluation of Mike McDonald at that point and whether or not he's the right man at the helm. If at that point at 2026, we're not in a potential playoff situation, then there needs to be some serious, answers for what's going on with this organization and why it can't get it right.
Yeah, Schneider's built up a lot of equity. He's built up a lot of goodwill, and deservedly so. Between him and Carroll, those first few years, we should cherish it for the rest of our lives. 7-9 team in 2010. Yeah, it was not a good team at all, but they also did extreme makeover Seahawks edition and won a playoff game, one of the greatest upsets we've ever seen against the reigning Super Bowl champions. And then after the little gap year in 2011, where we got to see the Legion of Boom origin story, you go playoff win in 2012 with a rookie quarterback, win the Super Bowl, come within a yard of winning another Super Bowl. That stretch is legendary for a Seahawks franchise that hasn't had a lot of legendary moments in terms of playoff success. But one playoff win in the last 8 seasons, in all likelihood, because this would be the 8th season, and one division win in 8 seasons, in all likelihood. A lot of GMs do not survive that. Obviously, Carroll didn't survive it because he's 1 win in 7, and they said goodbye. So the outlook after the bye week, it's a brutal schedule. And even if they had won the Rams game, it doesn't take away from the fact that was a really sloppy performance again from Seattle's offense. The bad snaps, the penalties, and the offensive line, like that would have been an escape. They should have won that game, but they slopped themselves straight out of a win and tanked their playoff chances as a result. This this schedule after the bye week, San Francisco likely lost. Like, how many games do you think Seattle would genuinely be favored to win? You got Arizona twice. Arizona's looking like at least a respectable team. Not saying they're going to be contenders, but at least a thorn in the side of most teams. The Jets, to be determined. I think they're a clown show, and Seattle can beat them. But then you've got the NFC North Gauntlet. You already had your Detroit game. Chicago, that's the quote-unquote easier games on the schedule left because they could be in flux and Eberflus could lose the team or whatever. But that's going to be a short week game after playing Minnesota in your final home game the week of Christmas. And Chicago, Christmas week, I wonder what the temperature is going to be like. So it's more likely than not they could end up finishing 6-11 or 7-10. And I vaguely remember, in fact, I'll pull it up. Didn't John Schneider say at the start of the season, we're not tanking, we got a mandate to compete. And that mandate came from ownership. So my speculation is that they moved on from Carroll kind of as in a controlled experiment. The variable is what happens when we remove Carroll and give John the full reins. Now, he might need multiple seasons to implement his vision, but the problem is a lot of those guys he signed are his moves. It's still his roster, and it's also his coaching staff. So if they bottom out, I don't think anybody is safe, realistically. We could very well see Schneider go. And what would suck is it's not inconceivable that if he goes, then McDonald goes. And I think that'd be unfair to McDonald and his coaching staff. But that's the reality. It's not like a Jim Mora 2.0 season, but the schedule is tough. It has been tough. They've been playing contenders, and they're going to be playing more contenders after the bye week. But I could have lived with 4-5 if they look like a team building something for 2025 and 2026 and showing some cohesiveness or seeing some younger players start to really develop. We're not seeing that consistently at all. We're seeing something out of like a bottom 10 team. So beyond this season is going to be fascinating because if they go 9-8 and narrowly miss the playoffs, or 9-8, make the playoffs and get bounced in the first round by Detroit or whomever, then I can envision them just saying, we're just narrowly off. And I'm not sure I really want to go through that again. Of course, I want my team to make the playoffs, but I also want to see the direction of the building of this roster and the organization as a whole look different than it has been the last several years. And if they do have to hit the reset button, we'll have to accept it. And they probably will have to accept it because look at some of the contracts they're dealing with. You're probably getting rid of Draymond. Lockett either going to retire or you're going to cut him because he's making $30 million a year next year, $30 million in his final season. George Fant, probably going to move on from him. Noah Fant, probably going to move on from him. Geno, you could move on from him. And even if you don't move on from him, that's the last year of his deal. So there's going to be, I think, significant roster turnover anyway next season. It's just a matter of, is there going to be more turnover than that at the end of the year as it pertains to the front office?
So, Mookie, I basically agree with everything you said. I think, for me, this season needs to look more like the 2011 Seahawks season, where you saw, like, if the defense really starts to play well and we start to see Mike McDonald's vision of this defense come to fruition the second half of the season after the bye, I think that's going to buy another year worth of time. But what I will say is, John Schneider and Mike McDonald, even though they coexist, they kind of separately exist at the same time as well because of John's connection to this prior regime that was in here with Pete Carroll. Now, I think he may have gone when he went and sold them on his vision to stay as GM, so he didn't get fired when Pete was let out the door. I think it was of the Jerry DiPoto kind of mindset when he took over the Seattle Mariners, which was, hey, look, here's what I want to do, but I will try and win with what I currently have and with this new coaching staff. If it doesn't work, I want to get rid of X, Y, Z, all these things going forward. And I think that's what he's got. He's been able to put his coaching staff in place, but I think he was, like you said, under that mandate to win, taking this roster that was constructed and trying to show to management. Because I think personally, and it's just, you know, a couple things I've texted a few people and they kind of feel the same way and have heard things as well, that there were a lot of moves that have been made in these last 3 years that prior to Mike McDonald that were really Pete-driven moves because Pete thought they were closer than they really were, and John wasn't necessarily on board with those moves, but went along because of the fact Pete held the title of president of football operations. So what I think you're seeing is it might be one of those where it goes, hey, look, I tried to take what we had built. It didn't work. It wasn't my initial vision. Let me get rid of some of this stuff, the Draymond Joneses of the world and some of these contracts that that we brought in. Let me go back and get with Mike McDonald. Because the other key aspect in this and why 2025, I think, is even more of a crucial microscope season, especially the offseason, is it'll be Mike McDonald's first one as the head coach, involved in a lot of the stuff that he wasn't able to be involved in this offseason because he got hired so late, had to build this staff with John Schneider. And then John Schneider didn't even take that staff to the combine or for the lot of scouting stuff. I think there was a disconnect maybe on what they wanted. I think the only pick really that they've nailed in this entire draft is probably, two picks they've nailed. I'm not sold totally on Tyrese Knight yet, but we'll see. Is AJ Barner. I think AJ Barner is going to be a very good tight end. And I think it's Byron Murphy is the other one, which is the obvious one. Everyone else in there is kind of up in the air because they're either becoming healthy scratches or they're not playing. So for me, like I said, 2026, I want to be able to sit there in that offseason 2 from now and go, you know what? I think this team is on a better course to be a playoff contender, to be, the quarterback situation's more clear on what they're doing because they'll have to have it at that point. And this team's set up to be what they've been claiming they've wanted to be for 5 years, which is physical, aggressive, and all those things. If they're not in that kind of mantra and we don't see that, then I think there is like you said, John Schneider's built up some equity with everyone in good faith. It'll deteriorate like that in Seattle here because it'll show that he's incapable of building what he keeps saying he wants to.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up 2011 because, and I brought it up earlier, but in passing, that team started 2-6, and it was a semi-injured Tavares Jackson, rest in peace, and Charlie Whitehurst for a couple of games. And Whitehurst was so bad in one of those games. What was it? The 6-3 Browns game. And then they let him play the following week, and he was so bad in that one that they let an injured Tavares Jackson play in relief. But they looked bad, and they looked like they were going a bit backwards from the 2010 team. And then the second half of the season happened, and they were in the wild card hunt with 2 weeks left in the season. And they narrowly lost to a 49ers team that went to the NFC Championship game and might have gone to the Super Bowl if Kyle Williams didn't fumble the ball twice on punt returns. So that gave us sort of that hope. And even with the injury, Jackson, we knew his limitations as a quarterback, and he's not as good as Geno Smith. He wasn't even on that level. He's like in the 20 to 25 range of starters, where you could tell, and they acknowledged as such by signing Matt Flynn before drafting Russell Wilson, they felt that we just need an upgraded quarterback and maybe a couple pieces here. They were a lot closer to making that next step. And everything fell into place where, yes, a significant upgraded quarterback improved the offense, and they had an identity established in the second half of that season. Marshawn Lynch was racking up touchdowns and getting regular 100-yard games. They were working the play action, and the defense went from struggling a bit and inexperienced to one of the top units in the league. The best case scenario for Seattle is something similar to 2011, where the defense improves substantially. And if Geno tapers off, then we know what happens. But if Geno plays well, then we know what the situation is for the Seahawks moving forward, where, yeah, they are close, but does that mean you keep Geno? Not necessarily, but it does mean that there are pieces of a good team in place, and you don't have to completely blow everything up. But yes, 2026 offseason is going to tell us a whole lot, because right now the 2025 offseason, I think we're going to see some significant changes to the roster. But if the coaching staff changes because of Schneider, in other words, if he realizes he might have made some mistakes, or he realizes he might have needed to have some Baltimore Ravens ties there, we could see some changes there, like a last-ditch thing. I believe that the Grubb and Huff hirings were well-intended, but they were also gigantic risks. And while nothing wrong with being risky, that's the side of the offense that really needed to step up, I think, even more than the defense, in order for this team to contend, because we see offense wins. It's an offense-driven league, and you were relying on an offensive line coach and an offensive coordinator, neither of whom have ever had a day in the NFL prior to now. And the college rules are different. The hash marks are different. The recruiting is different. The talent level is different. Everything is different. So they're having to adjust too. I guess maybe the best case scenario, or the one defense Schneider could have of himself as to why he should get another year, is the inexperience of some of the coaching staff that he assembled. In other words, the roster is learning. McDonald is learning as a rookie head coach. So he wants maybe to tell Jody Allen and the ownership, let the coaching staff development and everything will fall into place.
No, and those are very, very compelling arguments for John Schneider to make in this offseason, and we'll have to see if it does end up saving his job, or if this team can make a slight turnaround and play better ball after this bye. They've got a gauntlet here, and it really is a gauntlet from the 49ers game till the end of the season versus the Rams. I'd say the Jets are probably their weakest opponent they're about to play. Mm-hmm. The Cardinals are good, or as we said, they're up and down, but they're at least competing. The 49ers, we know, are still the 49ers in some aspects. The Packers and Vikings both look like two playoff-worthy teams. The Bears are in a little bit of flux, and we just played the Rams team, and we'll have to go to LA to play them in the last game of the year. So with that being said, to wrap up the show, let's get into our viewer questions and comments. So we've had some of them roll in throughout, and guys, if you want to get them in before the end of the show, make sure you get them in there now. We'll start answering some of these. So we got Ian, who's regularly in our chat. O-line was an atrocity to the point where if Aaron Donald was playing, he would have had a field day, 100%. I would not have wanted to see Aaron Donald in that Rams game. That I think we may have lost Geno permanently in that game if Aaron Donald had been in there.
Yes, I'm glad that Aaron Donald is retired. I am terrified that Verse and Fisk might recreate Donald in the aggregate. And what was really interesting to me is you look at that Rams rookie class, they might have rebuilt their defense already. Kinchins, and boy, it sucks to have somebody named Cam torture the Seahawks with valuable defensive plays. But Kinchins, somebody they drafted, and somebody who was on my radar as a potential draft pick for Seattle. Yeah, Verse, first-round pick. Now, Rams probably wanted Murphy, and not even probably. We saw the video. But Verse is a pretty good consolation prize. And then Fisk, they traded up to get him. And I questioned the pick at the time, thinking, is he really worth trading up for in the second round, giving up next year's second rounder? Well, so far it looks like he is. And then Kobe Turner was a Defensive Rookie of the Year finalist last year. So I'd say one of the data points against Schneider is the Rams and 49ers haven't been tanking regularly. They haven't been accumulating a lot of draft capital. We know the Rams and their F them picks mentality, but when they do draft, their guys are contributing right away. That McCullough guy, I forgot his first name. We got the interception. That undrafted free agent, he's got 4 picks on the year. So yes, I'm glad that Aaron Donald isn't there, but if the Rams have rebuilt their defensive line in record time, that's all the more reason for Seattle to invest in the offensive line, because other than Arizona and their total lack of a pass rush, like San Francisco and the Rams, those dudes aren't going away. Bosa's still going to be there. Fred Warner's going to be blitzing. You're going to have Fisk and Versa to deal with for several seasons to come.
No, can't argue with any of that, and that's exactly the case. Is, you know, again, D lines are good in this division. The Niners have a good D line with Bosa and the weapons they've got there. The Rams clearly have rebuilt theirs potentially in one draft. The Cardinals are going to have pieces, so it'll definitely be something Seattle has to do this offseason. It can't be, oh, we'll do it in 2. It's this offseason. You rebuild your O-line and make it a strength of the team. Very much so like you did with your D-line, to the point where now we're not so worried about our D-line as we once were. Fun Guy 345 says, everything would have to be perfect for Geno to get you anywhere.
Well, I'm not asking for literal perfection, but I get what the point is. Like, that's why I put him in that tier with Goff and Cousins. Now, it hasn't been perfect on the defensive side for the Lions. Hutchinson just shattered his leg, but they just traded for Zadarius Smith, and they've had a good defense this year. So when you have a very good defense, best offensive line in the league, and elite skill position players everywhere, there's your chance for Jared Goff to be considered an MVP candidate, even though I don't think he should be, especially not relative to Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. I see that blue and green zone. I think Bo will be there because Chenault and Lockett may not be there. Well, I don't want to see Bobo move up to wide receiver 3. I don't think he's got that potential.
No.
I think Bobo will hang around for his rookie contract, but Chenault's definitely not going to be there, and Lockett probably isn't there. But that, to me, would be incentive for Seattle to either sign a veteran free agent wide receiver, or, like, you know, a Darnell Mooney equivalent in free agency, or draft. I actually wanted them to keep drafting receivers in this year, because I think that's an area where you can never have enough. But they're probably going to have to draft receivers next year anyway, given the uncertain future of Lockett and DK.
No, I totally agree with you. I don't want to see Bobo as a 3. He can be a 3 in some packages if you need him to block, but, you know, I can't see him getting the influx of targets. And you know what I'd rather see, to be perfectly honest? I'd rather see JSN, DK, and AJ Barnaby more of a weapon as a 3, as a tight end, than us having to rely on 3 receiver sets all the time to get 3 true weapons out on the field.
Mm-hmm.
Do you all think Abe Lucas will play good if he starts against the Niners? Oh, that blue and green zone, that was a good one.
Yeah, well, Nick Bosa is probably going to be going opposite him, because he went opposite Forsythe, and Forsythe, he tried.
He tried.
But with Lucas, I don't know, because he was all right last year when he played after being on IR for a while. But then there was a point in time in the Pittsburgh game where we realized he just couldn't go. And my fear, especially knowing what just happened with Fant, is that the same thing happens to Abe Lucas, where they're trying to make him ready. Don't forget, today's November 6th. If he is not activated next week, then he goes back to PUP and his season is over. And even if he is on the active roster next week, there's no guarantee he plays against San Francisco. It just means he's on the active roster, and he might need another week or so to ramp up a practice. But if Lucas comes back, hopefully that can help Bradford. In other words, having a valuable right tackle, a serviceable right tackle, can kind of have that trickle effect where the interior line isn't struggling as much. But I hope Abe Lucas plays well, because he was arguably Seattle's best offensive lineman when he was healthy in 2022.
No, and that's the thing, is I would expect when Abe does get back, he's in a rotation, whether it's with Jarrell or it's with Fant. If Fant can somehow, now I haven't heard an update on Fant if he's going back on IR with his knee injury. So we'll have to see. MWM puts in, Geno is not QB of the Hawks' future, so it might be tough giving him a top 10 QB contract type money. Can't argue with him.
No,
it's hard.
Not really. I mean, there is what I'm glad to see out of Geno and Baker Mayfield is that there is sort of a middle-ish class for quarterbacks always. So it can't be rookie contract and how valuable rookie quarterback contracts are, or you're paying $50 million and up. Like, that can't be the thing, because you end up with bad decisions like the Giants signing Daniel Jones to that silly contract. But paying him top 5, top 10 money, that pretty much means the onus is on you to have top 5 offensive line. And that is probably not going to be happening in the blink of an eye. It just isn't. And he might be a short-term solution, but long-term, it's probably going to have to be somebody else. And look, if Sam Howell has to play behind this offensive line, he will challenge Derek Carr's sack record even with four games played or something like that. Because one of the knocks on Washington last year is they didn't have a good offensive line, and Howell took a lot of sacks, and he passed the ball a lot, and he took sacks at an exorbitant rate more than Geno has this year. What do you think is going to happen if he's in the lineup? The same thing. So if it goes back to the O-line, I want the offensive line built so that it is not a shambles, whether Geno is back next year or Howell is starting or they draft Cam Ward or whomever. Like, have that in place before you know your quarterback situation.
Totally agree. So we've got Jason here that goes, damn, I wish I'd seen a notification on Field Gulls this early. It just got here. And then he follows up with, it is a decent draft for receivers too, I think. So maybe your philosophy, Mookie, of them constantly taking receivers every year will pay off because they'll be able to get decent guys in those mid rounds. As long as they're not spending high capital on it, I'm okay. And we got Ian in here. O-line has to improve next season or John has to go. The D-line in the NFC West is great. Now with the Cardinals getting a pass rusher from the Broncos. No, that's totally fair. And that's, very accurate. Like, Cardinals have now upgraded. You have to fix this. There is no way if John Schneider does what he's been doing. I don't know if you've seen the movie Draft Day, Mookie, but I feel like the Barbarians are going to be at the VMAC gate going after John Schneider saying, hey, we're tired and we're sick and tired of watching a piss poor offensive line out there. Put something better on the field. Put a better product out there for us to pay money to.
Yeah, it has to improve, and it has to have a clear identity. Again, I'm having to say this a lot, but are you a run blocking line? Are you a shotgun heavy offensive line? Are you an offensive line capable of dominating under center? Sorry, the Lions play great old school power football with new school concepts mixed in with Ben Johnson as offensive coordinator, and they just bully you out of the joint. The Eagles have a great offensive line still, even with Kelsey retired. Maybe it's not as good as last year. They run shotgun an exorbitant number of times. In fact, they almost never run from under center. The Seahawks run shotgun, I think the fourth highest rate in the league. And when they run from under center, they're not remotely effective. When they run from shotgun, they're even less effective than that. So they have to be good at least one thing. One thing, if anything I could say about the Tom Cable offensive lines, at least the early seasons, as bad as they were in pass protection, they could at least run block. They could at least get to their assignments in zone read. They could at least climb to the second level in ways that this current offensive line can't do much of anything in terms of getting past the first level. They're losing at the point of attack so quickly. And I even shared that one of the first 3rd and 1 failure of the game. So with the opening quarter, and you have Anthony Bradford failing to cut block, and then you have George Fant and Connor Williams getting thrown to the ground, and you have 3 guys down there like bowling pins, as if they were knocked down by Pete Weber in his prime. And that just kind of sums up the Seahawks offensive line, doesn't it? It's like it's much closer to 2017. And we know how legendarily bad that O-line was, even with Dwayne Brown on it, than it'll ever sniff the legendary 2005 offensive line. Maybe it's too much to ask for the 2005 offensive line, but I just want something that is above average, slightly above average, and Seattle might have an extra win or two under their belts. But this cannot continue, or else you're going to either ruin Geno now or ruin your future quarterback if you move on from Geno, or both. I don't want to see that happen.
Exactly. Like, even if they were to draft in my case, a Drew Alar or Garrett Nussmeier, I wouldn't want to put them behind this offensive line. There's not a chance. You'd shatter their confidence before they'd even. You look at what's happened to Bryce Young down in Carolina that first year. They put him behind a horrendous offensive line. And now everyone's talking about if Bryce Young's broken. We're talking about a guy that won a Heisman Trophy, a guy that was leading Alabama to SEC championships and was one of the top picks. And I get there's certain questions about his, stature and whatnot. But to have a dude break that fast, that quickly, with that amount of starts underneath him as a college quarterback is unheard of. But you go and you point right at what Carolina did with their offensive line. You surrounded him with horrible talent, a horrible offensive line, and he got shell-shocked. And you know what? Like, that's kind of a thing where, again, if a team like Carolina, like we were talking about Anthony Richardson earlier, if they were to ship a guy and be like, hey, we're moving on, Bryce Young, to me, wouldn't be a bad guy to bring in here and have him compete with Sam Howell to be a backup potentially if you can fix the offensive line. But all the quarterback conversation is going to be a derivative of, can you fix the offensive line and can you build a running game off of that? That's the other part of this equation is we have good running backs. We have Ken Walker. We have Charbonnet. We have Kenny Mack, who's another back I'd like to see get more touches as Ken McIntosh. But when we can't run the ball, we can't help our quarterback at all because we can't do anything. So, but Mookie, this was a fun episode. Number 2 for us, now that this one didn't have any technical issues due to storm and weather. But honestly, I hope this team's going in the right direction after this bye week. I hope we see a bit of a better performance against the 49ers than we did the first time around. And Mookie, I'll let you plug away anything you got going over on Field Gulls here and tell the listeners what's going on that side of things.
Yeah, and I just see the comments from Jason. No thanks. Little Bryce Young in the cold, slippery Northwest. That sounds like a children's television show. Little Bryce Young went to the cold, slippery Pacific Northwest, like some sort of comedy sketch or something. Yeah, I'm not high on Bryce Young right now, and probably not sure the fan base would want another smaller quarterback, so we can have that discourse again. But still, we could see Seattle do something of that effect, try and revive a draft bust, so to speak. As far as what I'm doing, it's the bye week. I'm going to chill a little bit because we go to 110 miles an hour, especially that stretch where we're covering 3 games in 10 days. But be looking a little more at the offensive line performances, especially with Williams and Bradford. But it's not all going to be negative because, yeah, that Rams game sucked. But the development of Smith and Jigba, whether he can be a downfield threat, already wrote an article on that. Might do a little bit more on what he can provide in the long term for the offense. And maybe take a little peek at the defense and see if this loss, as much as it sucked, can be a turning point for that side of the ball too, where they're going to at least keep the Seahawks in games for the rest of the season, as opposed to the non-competitive stuff we saw earlier in the season.
Well, I'll be definitely looking out for those articles when they come out. On our side here, guys, on the HawksZone Rundown, on Saturday, 2 p.m., set your notifications. We will have Jackson Bevins from Cigar Thoughts, Brandon Keem from the Hawk Nest, and Dan Viens from the Seahawks Forever podcast joining to do a mid-season roundtable. It's going to be a longer than normal live stream, so make sure you guys are tuning in. Get your questions in and all that for the show. And we'll have those guys bring their thoughts, opinions, positives, negatives so far, and where they see this team going in the future. So that's coming up on Saturday, so make sure you're tuned in for that. Mookie, I appreciate you coming back. We'll see you in a couple weeks for episode 3 of this, and hopefully at that point we're talking about a couple more positives for this team rather than the negatives.
Oh, don't worry. If we get a win over the 49ers and McCaffrey plays, we will be here an hour and a half just talking about, can they run the table and make it all the way to the Super Bowl, as any logical fan would rightfully say.
That's very, very true, and it could be a very real possibility if they can get their stuff together over the bye week. So thanks again, Mookie. Everyone else, have a good night. Go Hawks.